So
I suspect that's changed quite a lot now, and it hasn't for years.
What's your religious perspective? What's your religious perspective?
Well, I'm a Jew.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a born Jew, but I'm a committed Jew because I married a Jewish girl, and therefore my children are Jewish, and my grandchildren are Jewish. So I think of myself as Jewish, not necessarily pro-Israel. And my wife and my daughter are very critical of Israel.
That's good.
But they're Jewish and they feel threatened at times, from time to time. And when people are threatened, they tend to be pushed to the extremists for protection. You know, it's like Hamas, it's like Gaza. You get me talking now. It's like Gaza, the people there. It's like Ireland. You know, during the troubles in Ireland,
yes,
people,
absolutely.
There were hardliners. There were people who were determined and would risk their lives and kill other people. And there was the general population, which, generally speaking, were supportive of the hardliners because they were scared not to be.
Yeah.
You know, and I suspect that's the same in...
I think with this case, when every day people are seeing like certain images and certain videos on social media, and then when they turn towards their politicians, and the politicians, it's like one of the representatives recently was hired by Donald Trump to be in his cabinet, and there was a tweet of somebody sending a beheaded child to him and saying, "How do you sleep after seeing this?" And he said, I sleep absolutely fine, no problem whatsoever. So when people see that we don't have any legitimate avenue to air our grievances, then I think you're absolutely right. That frustration can tend to push them to the edge and make them feel a certain way, as if they're not being heard. And because of that, they'll have to now raise their voice and do more visible acts for themselves to be heard. And I think that's what it is. And that's where the government, if it doesn't give everybody a viable outlet.
Which government?
Well, the government that's here. If we're talking about British people, and we're talking about the protests happening here, and the protesters don't feel heard, or they don't, like if Keir Starmer's being asked, what do you think about Israel cutting off the electricity, water, food, and he's saying, and his response is on LBC, they have a right to defend themselves. People were rightly furious with that, saying that's unacceptable. That's pretty much ethnic cleansing rhetoric. And if that's what the leaders are, then people feel very helpless. I think that's what it is. And they become more frustrated and more angry, and seeing maimed children day in, day out will do that to you. And when you see on the other side constant reaffirmation of genocidal rhetoric and not it being taken back. For example, I'm sure you know all of this, what was said by the higher-ups in Israel. When you're hearing that constantly again and again and again and again, then that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens, unfortunately.
So what was the last bit you said when you ran through?
Yeah, I think the summary was that when people are hearing and seeing genocidal pictures and rhetoric, and the governments are brushing over it or being seen to justify it. Why? Because they've got some vested interest in Israel and not in Palestine. Then people become frustrated. They become more louder, more aggressive, because they want to be heard. Because who doesn't want to be heard? Everyone wants to be heard, and that seemingly is supposed to be the bedrock of democracy. Everybody feels heard. Everybody votes. Everybody gives their view. Free speech is supposed to come out of democracy, that everyone gets heard, regardless of their views. But when both of those start getting quashed, start getting suppressed, when we know about foreign interferences like what we've seen with the AIPAC guy, like every Republican member has an APAC guy. When people hear this, they become very frustrated and annoyed. Like American and Brits are struggling in their daily kind of life, and then we found out, oh, the millions have been transferred back to Israel. You know, not back, but millions of dollars of aid, on a regular basis, given to Israel. And you're like, why?
Well, it's because we know the reason for that.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
So point going into it.
And when people know that reason, the frustration becomes compounded. Then it's like you're complicit with the genociders. Why is there any time whenever there's a vote in the UN Council for any progress, US is the only one vetoing it? So that compounds. Why is it that people are getting knocks on the door because they've got a Palestinian flag outside because someone feels threatened because of a flag? That compounds the problem. Why is it that somebody that's just posted a flag on their social media and they've been fired from their job compounds the problem? And that's why I think it's become polarizing, and certain people might think, you know what, it is becoming a bit difficult. What do you think about that?
I think that Israel is a threatened entity. Whether it's a legitimate country or not is another debate. The British were involved back in 1908 or whenever it was, and after the war, Israel was created, whether legitimately, I mean at the time legitimately, but and they're threatened. They're threatened by neighbours, and if people are threatened, they will respond, and they're capable of response because they get such aid from America, so many dollars and so many weapons, and they're almost invulnerable. They're so powerful, and I don't know the answer to the problem. I recognise that the land, there's a good claim to the land they occupy being Palestinian land or Arabic land, but nevertheless, you know, we have to deal with the reality. How do we? Is it feasible to say, as has often been said, everybody should and could and can, if there's a will, live in peace and live in harmony? And there have been times when we've got close, you know.
Yeah, I would definitely say there was definitely a time in Palestine where you did have a convivencia of Christians, Jews and Muslims. They did live in peace. It's been shown to work. We know in the 800-year Muslim rule of Spain that also worked. Maimonides is considered one of the most influential Jewish personalities of the past. He was given respect and he did live.
Who was that?
Maimonides.
Oh, yeah.
So he was, and he did live harmoniously, and he was given a very high rank from the Caliph of that time as well, and he did speak very highly of the Caliphate of the time as well. So we do know it does work, but as Karen Armstrong has said, in her opinion and in her book that she's written Fields of Blood. She's an ex-nun. She's concluded that most of these issues actually arise from geopolitical issues. They're not religious differences. But well, I mean, that was what she said. But here's an interesting point that I wanted to say. I mean, I tend to agree with your sentiment with regards to what's going on now, because when post October the 7th, Netanyahu, when he came in front of the cameras, he said Amalek. And somebody who's familiar with the Old Testament knows Amalek is referring to 1 Samuel 15 verse 3, which, if I am to paraphrase, says, kill all of the Amalekites, the men, women, children, the infants, and suckling babies. Kill even the donkeys, the cows, and the likes. In other words, leave nothing. And when he came in front of the cameras, he said Amalek. B'Tselem, who's a human rights organization in Israel, says anyone who's gone through the education system in Israel knows when Amalek is proclaimed or mentioned, they mean kill everyone. There's no difference of opinion amongst Israelis what Amalek means. You'll have some Christian that might be able to give an exegesis of that verse here in London, Hyde Park, Marble Arch. However, in Israel, there's a national understanding of what that word means. So, as somebody that's Jewish, that you can tell me your connection with the Torah and the Old Testament. Is that something how does that settle with you? 1 Samuel 15:3.
Well, the trouble is, I don't subscribe to the Quran or the Bible or any of the Jewish books either. I don't. So, what was written by human beings, apparently from God, years ago, I dismiss. I just don't. It doesn't touch me. So if people say Amalek and people know it's from a holy book in some people's eyes, I just think to myself, you've got to rise above that. And there are plenty of people who do rise above that. So, it would probably frighten me if I was not Jewish and living in Israel and I believed in all the scriptures, but I don't. And my kids are Jewish and they're proud to be Jewish, and my grandchildren are proud to be Jewish, but they're not driven by the Old Testament or any other book, the Quran or any book. My eldest and smartest granddaughter is at Cambridge, and when I asked her yesterday about her education, I couldn't follow what she was saying. I really couldn't. It was so intellectual and improbable that I was lost from the beginning. I just thought to myself, and I did say to her, I was a first-year student at St. Catherine's College. How does this affect your well-being and your life and your future and your prospects? And she couldn't really answer that. But then my daughter chipped in and said, that's not what Cambridge is setting to do. They're setting to get people to think in a way that I've never been educated sufficiently to think, and you certainly haven't, pointing at me or Dad, and this is true, of course. So I can't really make any sensible comment. I understand that.
I think you have answered it by saying you don't deem it to be a word of God. You don't follow it. So I'm assuming you said yourself you converted to Judaism because of your wife. So it's more of a label than it is a moral compass or a way of life. And with the kids, they are possibly ethnically Jewish. And I think you have answered.
But they're not. There are lots of Jews like that. They keep the. Don't even keep the Sabbath, but they keep the holy days, and they eat matzahs on certain days, and they do. But that's it. It's kind of a show of. It's not, when it comes down to it, there's. They don't really believe in.
But here's the.
They don't believe that. All the non-Jews should be killed, and the cows and the donkeys and the children, and they just don't believe that. They just don't. The thing that to get to kind of practice, to get to the last 3 years, two and a bit years, I just understand what you say about being heard. Not necessarily so much in this country, but if you live in Gaza or you live on the West Bank, I understand what you're saying, and how they. I don't really understand how they may feel. Of course, I don't. How could I if I didn't live there? But I kind of hope to try and empathise with them in my way. But then I think to myself, Hamas say in public and on the radio, and I don't need people to tell me in terms of second-hand news and second-hand speech. I hear principal people from Hamas saying everybody in Gaza will give their lives and their children's lives if they have to. They don't want to, but they know they have to in certain circumstances, because the land occupied by the Jews is our land and we demand it back. And if we have to, we will kill all the Jews and their children. Just what you are saying in reverse. And this is somebody who's willing to come on BBC radio or LBC radio and say these things out loud. And I think to myself, No wonder the Israelis are frightened, you know. And then, on the other hand, the people in Gaza say, how can we protest? Israel has all the might. They're mighty and they're ferocious. And they're vicious if they have to be. Under certain circumstances, they're vicious. And then they're like a lion. They're like an untamed wild lion. And then they go and poke the lion with a stick by sending people on motorcycles to kill Jews at a music concert, you know, and take captives back to Gaza. And I think, so, what are Hamas thinking? What do they think Israel are going to do? Do they think there's going to be a measured response? You know there's not going to be a measured response. The animal is mad in defending what they believe.
You know what's interesting though? I saw a very simplistic kind of encapsulation of this that was, I think, possibly aimed at towards the Gen Z. They said when we watched Star Wars, we sided with the occupied. When we watched Dune, we sided with the occupied. When we watched any Avatar, we sided with the occupied. However, when it comes to Israel-Palestine, it's complicated, it's difficult. When we've seen Israel constantly encroaching, taking over, blockading, not allowing, they say themselves, we're shutting off water, food, electricity. Why should a occupying force be allowed and given the power to do that?
But they weren't cutting off food and electricity.
It actually happened 2 weeks ago.
They weren't doing it before the attack on the Jews at the music concert. They weren't doing that. To a large extent, people were living in relative harmony, certainly relative to today.
I'll give you an example.
With buildings ruined and no water and people were managing a reasonable life. It may not be the life they aspired to, but nevertheless, it was a life that was tolerable and people were living. And lots of people from Gaza were going to work in Israel. And there are people I was sitting in a cafe in Ealing, where I live, Palestinian cafe. And I was sitting next to the proprietor who came out drinking a cup of coffee. He turned out to be the proprietor. And I said to him, is this really a Palestinian cafe? He said, yes, it is. W5 in Ealing. You can look it up if you need to. And so I said, whereabouts in the Middle East did you come from? So he said, from Israel. He said, I have an Israeli passport. He said, I'm free to do as I like. He said, I'm here now in the UK. I said, how did you get? He said, well, for years, he said, I was working for the Israelis. He said, I was living in the West Bank and I was going to Jerusalem to work and so on. So to a certain extent, there was a kind of harmony, which is better than it is at this very moment.
But to quote the words of Malcolm X, he says that you stab us with the knife, you take it out 6 inches and you expect us to be grateful. The usul or the bedrock.
He said what? You do what? You stab us with the knife?
Yeah, you stab us with a knife,
yes.
Then you take it out a few inches,
yes.
And you expect us to be grateful for that. Remove the knife. Fix the wound, then we'll be grateful.
But the Israelis hadn't removed the knife. They hadn't taken, the knife was still there, that's a granted. But that's my point. It wasn't a knife, it was far worse than a knife. It was lots of knives and guns and inhuman measures. They were still there, they weren't being applied, or if they were being applied, they were being applied very little, relatively. And yet,
are you aware, like you mentioned October the 7th, or we mentioned it, are you aware of the massacre of Sabra and Chatilla? So that was a massacre that Israel carried out in Palestine. Doesn't get mentioned.
when?
Let me give you the...
I mean, is it kind of contemporary or?
No, it's not contemporary. That's why it gets brushed under the carpet. However, so that was in 1982, and that was when the men were out for war and 3,500 people were killed, and those were only women and children, and that was in a space of 5 hours. So those are 3 October the 7th that took place in one go. Doesn't get mentioned, doesn't get brought up. It's not even worth the conversation. In fact, even when it comes to peaceful protesting, that's why I'm saying that even when they've been seen to be peacefully protesting, there was a report. This was the UN released a report in 2019, and it was to do with the 2018 protests.
So why are you telling me this?
Sorry?
So why are you telling me this?
I'm telling you this because when you're...
justify October the 7th or whatever it is. Is that
I-
what you're trying to do?
No, what I'm saying is that it's more so a counter question to you. That does it justify all of these things? Does it justify what Israel is doing?
I have never said that. All I've said is that in terms of Israel's behaviour, I'm not necessarily supportive, but I understand it, and it's predictable. It was predictable.
But
when
surely-
Hamas went and killed all those people on October whatever it was at the music festival, the response was going to be ferocious. Everybody knew that.
But after
So why did
the-
Hamas do that?
But after the Sabra and Chatilla,
I mean, they're living in Qatar in relatively luxury, and yet they organise an attack that is going to have desperate repercussions.
we can
what
say
kind of leaders are they?
we can say the same about Israeli actions. They've lost so many, they've lost so much economically. They've been told by even their biggest allies like Biden to calm down, you're going too far now. There was no line. They said themselves, we're going to wipe everything out. The issue went to the ICJ, the ICC. Yeah.
So what is your solution? Or what is your...
I don't know the solution, nor do I claim to know the solution. But, sorry?
Nor do I.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but at the very least, I'm hoping that people can say and understand that if you have a group that's been subjugated and beaten and wrecked, they are going to rise up. To say that it happened out of nowhere, or why did they respond? If my house has been taken over, I don't care if 10, 15 people, if I've got my wife and my mother there, I'm fighting till the end. And I'm sure you will either. You're not going to cower. You're not going to say, you know what, I'm going to listen to what someone else outside. These are my wives. It's my wife, my mother, my child. I'll fight till the end. So when people say they don't understand, I don't understand that statement of theirs, because if you've been subjugated for so long chocolate doesn't go in, wedding dresses don't go in, coriander doesn't go in, there's a blockade, where even going to school you have to wait on checkpoints for about 2 hours. That's not a life. That's a real life.
But why are all those measures?
Because they believe, and
why have they been introduced?
because if you look at any interview of the higher up, they say it's a promised land that's been promised to us by God. That's what it boils down
to the Bible or the Quran or the
we don't ever bring up the Quran. The Quran never gets brought up.
The Quran around here. They've given 3 books away and tell you which one.
Yeah, the Quran may be brought up when it comes to talking about God's existence and non-existence. However, when it comes to promised land, the Palestinians don't make the argument. The argument is only made by the Jews saying this is our promised land. It's said in the Torah, and somehow everybody is supposed to be okay with it. The Palestinians are simply saying, that's fine, that's in your book, but we're here. What do we do now? 2-state solution, you said solution. I'm saying Zippy Hatolvi is on LBC saying there is no 2-state solution. There's mixed messages going out. Oh, but the Palestinians, they need to be peacefully protesting. 2018 they did. The UN report says that, and it quotes, that the Israeli army intentionally targeted medics, intentionally targeted journalists, intentionally targeted disabled people, and intentionally targeted children. This, my friend, is what they're dealing with. They're not dealing with people that are thinking logically and rationally. They've taken a scripture that they believe, like, to put in George Galloway's words, God is not a realtor.
Please don't quote.
I'll just give the quotation then, because the quotation is good. God is not a realtor. He's not going to tell you, oh, this is your land or that's your land. How can you even say that when people are living on that land? You have to do it according to the law of God. Doesn't God then say don't kill innocent? But that's why I'm saying that there are so many inconsistencies that even when you look at like you mentioned, oh, Hamas said this, Hamas said that. I'm not defending Hamas, nor can I be seen to defend Hamas because it's against the law in this country. So saying it,
I need to be a member.
well, wherever the case may be, certain people have had knocks on the door saying you said this and it was construed as this. It's against the extremist, it's extremist rhetoric, or whatever the case may be. But just like there are certain Hamas members that may have said some negative things, many Hamas members and their clerics have said, we have no issues with the Jews. We only have issues with the people that are coming and killing us, and we only have an issue with them. We don't have an issue with you. Their charter, the old charter gets mentioned, but they don't mention the new charter in which they distinguish between Zionists and Jews. And the reason I'm telling you this is because sometimes for certain Jews, it's good to hear this side of the argument because they only know about the old charter that gets brought up a lot. And when we say, oh, but Daniel Hagari said when they were attacking Palestine and he was the spokesman for the army, he said our goal is destruction, not accuracy. Netanyahu said Amalek. Then you had the president, Herzog, saying all of Palestine, all is responsible, all of it. So when we give those quotes, they say, oh, but they are certain individuals. But most of the population doesn't think like that. I say, with all due respect, can that be extended to the other side as well? Because you tend to quote one or two Hamas opinions and members, ignoring their latest charter, ignoring what their clerics are saying, ignoring what majority of the Gazans and the views that they hold. There you don't want to say that you want to pinpoint certain Hamas individuals. When we do the same when it comes to Israeli officials, then, oh, no, don't do that. I don't know what Herzog said. But I can show you the clip where he's saying that. No, I don't agree with him then. Well, then I don't agree with this. Don't use this as an argument for you to justify killing of babies. My friend, it's beyond me how there are people that are justifying. They say there are rabbis that come on TV and say their babies.
I've never seen them.
I'll give you the clips. It's his name. I saved it on my Twitter. He's quite popular. He says the reason why we aim for their babies.
I'm very skeptical about people that are on television. I'll say I remember one lesson I learned was that the first Iraq War when Saddam invaded Kuwait. Was that right? Yes.
Yeah.
And a young lady, relatively attractive young lady, apparently Muslim, dressed like a Muslim would be, and she said, her face was showing, and she said, I saw people from Iraq coming to the hospital and bayonet babies. And afterwards, she said it wasn't true. I was told to say that. And
It's like the 40 beheaded babies lie.
I thought to myself, wow, she was so believable. She had me, what? She's saying it, she was there. It was a nurse or whatever she was.
Yeah.
She was totally convincing. So I'm very skeptical.
Yeah, I agree with you. The 40 beheaded babies was picked up by I-24, and then it was then taken up by the president. He then retracted because there was no evidence. It was retracted by even the news station, the anchor herself. However, you know the saying, the lies made its way around the globe before the truth's even put on its boots. So that was the exact same case here. People sometimes still bring up that 40 beheaded babies nonsense.
So what's your purpose today? You've now engaged me in a conversation which is being recorded and filmed.
Yeah.
So why are you here?
So initially with certain people that want to engage, I want to find out their views, and sometimes, often when it comes to Islam, there are certain misconceptions. So my view is that when they come and we engage in a conversation, they leave with more edified with regards to certain misconceptions that they may have pertaining Islam. Because obviously it's my faith, I study it. They may have a misconception with regards to how the Quran was compiled.
Do you think you've achieved your objective today?
The thing is, I'm also respectful of your time. But if the conversation was to go, because I did notice you said all the scriptures are man-made. So it would be beneficial if, but obviously I did remember you saying you had to leave as well. So it's up to you where the conversation goes. But if you did want to go, that was a conversation that I wanted to have, to tell you that obviously as Muslims, we don't believe that the Quran was man-made. We don't believe it was compiled decades and centuries after the one whom it was revealed to. I wanted to tell you that the Quran out of the ancient religions were the only ones that have manuscripts dating to the time, and comparing the text to what we have today, there's 100% word accuracy. I wanted to tell you also that even if you carbon date that manuscript, through carbon dating, it's dated to the time of the Prophet Muhammad.
If you believe that and it comforts you in any way, then I say that's fine. And I say the same about Jewish scripture and Christian scripture and all the other so-called.
But that's what I wanted to say. Yeah, it doesn't apply to the scriptures.
It's a model for leading a life and bringing up your children. Perfectly okay, until it starts to encroach on other people's beliefs and way of life, and then that leads to friction, which leads to war.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, as you rightly say, there are geopolitical maneuvers, which I don't know what drives that. I really don't. That's very
It's land, isn't it? We want land. Even liberalism, but even if you look at Hume and Kant, they have to talk about land, the distribution of land, how the land is linked with the state, and what's the relationship between the state and the land. Land has always played an important part since time immemorial. Look how America was they say discovered, but how can you discover a land in which people are already living? And then you're wiping them out using smallpox jumpers and all sorts of things. So we know with regards to America that we have today, we know about Australia and New Zealand. You had Aborigines in Australia. So land has played an integral part, and it's going to continue playing an integral part, because land is part of spoils of war. You want to increase your influence as much as you can. But what I wanted to say about scripture was that scriptures are seen differently. Jews and Christians don't believe that they have any manuscript that dates to the time of Moses or Jesus. So there's no way of verifying the accuracy of what they have today with what was there before.
To be honest now, I mean, you're talking to the wall, because I just can't cope with the idea that there's some celestial spirit, all-powerful, or even part-powerful, who allows children to have cancer.
So how do you believe all of this came to be then? Where do you rest your hat?
Well, nobody knows. And, it's the old story of when it gets to the point where the scientists are incapable of answering a question of the beginning, then the religious people of all denominations quickly jump in and say, well, there we are. God. And then when they can answer that particular issue, they move back one and say, oh, yeah, well, there we are. That was God. And then when that's answered, they say, oh, well, that was God.
Yeah, I agree. That's wrong. God, it's called God of the gaps. And forcing God in any gap that's unanswered is wrong. Similarly, forcing science into a gap where science can't explain it, I would argue that's science of the gaps. For example, Einstein himself very articulately said, science does not aim and cannot answer moral questions. So you cannot prove if something is good or bad using the scientific method, nor does science claim to understand it. However, when people say no, like you've got people like Professor Atkins and Dawkins and these guys claim that no, science can answer that realm, then I would argue the same, that that's science of the gaps. Why is science being forced into a realm that it cannot answer? For example, what came before the Big Bang? Science doesn't know. Therefore, they've now posited a model called the multiverse, which is baseless, has no evidence, not peer-reviewed, and they've just put that there just in case. We're working towards it. String theory, no evidence. We're working towards it. M theory of.
Isn't that fair enough? Isn't that fair enough?
But then I'd say
they do answer questions that have vexed people for generations historically. these have been answered.
I don't think if you
Gaps
cannot.
have been closed. Not all the gaps. There are more gaps. There will always
But
be
if you
more
can't
gaps.
answer how this universe came into being,
Why
extrapolating.
should I be able to answer that?
No,
Why
but
should anybody be able
but
to
the
answer
scientist is answering. That's the difference between
Why
what you're
shouldn't you
saying.
Just say because I can't answer, or the cleverest people in the land can't give you convincing arguments because there are gaps. Therefore, you're doing the same as you just said. That's not right, but you're doing it.
No, what I'm saying is that
There are gaps.
what I'm saying that you're accusing religious folk of forcing God where science can't
I'm
answer.
not forcing God to anything.
I'm not saying you. I'm talking about religious
No,
folk.
but I'm
That's what
already
you said.
saying- and generally speaking, people, I think most people, a lot of people agree with me, I hope, is that religions of all sorts as a model for life and bringing up children and enhancing civilization are good. They're welcome. They're for the good. Even if it's nonsense, they're for the good.
Is it for the good though?
Well, it is. It can be for the good and often is for the good.
Because in this conversation, we already demonstrated how religion can be used not for the good. But the point that I was saying here was just like religious folk
That's my
are.
point there. You're confirming my point.
I'm confirming your point, but I also want to direct your attention towards a what's good for the goose, what's good for the gander sort of thing. That if you're saying religious folk use religion to fill in the gaps, and I'm saying scientists do the same with the unanswered questions, on the other foot, you're saying scientists should be allowed to do so. One second.
No, but they say we don't know.
No, but they're saying the multiverse and string theory and M theory, they are theories.
They're theories, but they're not facts.
Well,
No,
but
I
they've.
agree, but that doesn't mean that it must be God, therefore, because they're not absolute facts.
What I'm saying is, yeah, and what educated religious folks say is, just because there is a mechanism for it may be M theory, string theory, Stephen Hawking called it gravity, yeah? Those are mechanisms.
Hawking called it gravity?
Yeah, Hawking in his book, The Grand Design or whatever, he said, when he was asked what created everything, he said gravity. So he referred it and deferred it to a force, which, if you're interested, I can tell you why I believe it to be ridiculous.
I may even have the book, but I certainly haven't read it.
Yeah, it is. It's not an easy read, but saying I've spoiled it for you. It's like Dumbledore dying. I've told you, oh, he believes it to be gravity. I've lifted the curtain, but gravity is a force. But here's the thing: what we say is these are all mechanisms. That's a different category. God is a creator of mechanisms. So just because you know a mechanism doesn't take God out of the equation. For example, someone knows how the Ford car works. Yeah, you know the mechanisms. That doesn't mean Henry Ford now, just because you know how it works, no longer exists.
He was anti-Semitic.
Well, a lot of people are considered anti-Semitic. Michael Jackson's considered
He was
anti-Semitic.
proudly anti-Semitic.
Well, Rabbi Shmuley did try to bring him around, but unfortunately he convinced them to be more anti-Semitic. So over here, what I'm saying is that science has its role. That's why you had the head of the Human Genome Project. He was, until very recently, he was a Christian. However, he took over from Watson, who was responsible for bringing the double helix to us. Sorry, brother. To the double helix to us. So why? But he was an atheist. So you have somebody that was an atheist taken over by, his name's Francis Collins. So sorry, brother, we're in a conversation. Yeah, don't be rude, brother. Yeah, sorry, brother. So because you have a so there's no real issue between science and religion. There's no real contradiction. The only contradiction, or not contradiction, the fight occurs between theism and atheism. That's what it is. When people bring science into it, scientists have been, many scientists have been Muslim, many have been Christian, and they've been doing fantastic and great work. And in fact, Darwin himself, he said, never in my wildest fluctuations did I ever become an atheist. Till his dying breath, the most he went to was agnosticism, and his contemporary was somebody called Asa Gray, who was a committed Christian. So Asa Gray had no issue with accepting evolution, but also sticking true to Christianity. So when people say that they have to be at loggerheads, I think the quote attributed to Einstein, which is religion without science is lame and science without religion is blind. In other words, both require each other. Both need each other. because both are talking about different things. One's talking about the physical, one's talking about the metaphysical, and both of them do need to be married. And we're seeing this more now with consciousness. Indeed, certain people, they will say, no, consciousness is, it's make-believe. But if you and me, we are both sitting down watching the same horror movie, how is it that we have different experiences if we are only the physical matter? There is something there. And that something should not be cut out. Why? Because it's bordering onto the metaphysical. That's not science. Science is supposed to be open to all endeavor, all questions, if of course they can be measured, they can be calculated, or whatever the case may be. So pertaining God, what I'm saying is that even if you look logically, philosophically, you are left with three options. Either you believe the universe came from nothing, or you believe it created itself, or you believed there was an agency, an intelligence. I just don't know what that is. Let's continue the conversation.
We agree on that, so I can leave on that basis. We agree on that, but so we don't know. But I don't know that necessarily science needs religion. I mean, I think society needs a kind of religion, a kind of.
Because science can't prove right or wrong, can't prove purpose. It doesn't prove mathematics.
So what? I mean, all this is attributed to your education and your thinking ability to think. But so what? I mean,
I'll tell you so what. Because if that's used to disprove religion, I'm saying let's bring that under the microscope.
I'm not. Nobody. All I'm saying is, how can you? To me, it is incredible that somebody who can think like you and can think like Einstein, if you like, if I can put you on that plane.
Thank you. I'll take that.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. But it's just incredible to me that all this can be answered by some kind of spirit in the sky or in the ground or wherever it is. Some kind of spirit, all-powerful spirit. It just seems to me. I went to see a.
No, finish that thought.
No, well, that is the finish.
Absurd.
But I'm going to just kind of explain it in a way that a child sees it. We went to see two guys, famous. I can't remember their names now, and they were famous so-called musicians, not musicians.
Actors, comedians.
No.
Sports.
Where they make people disappear. What are they called?
Magicians.
Yeah. And on this particular trick, somebody in the audience is invited to carve their name on a bullet, and the bullet is put into the gun, and everybody sees that. The cameras see it up close, and the person who puts his name on the bullet is checked out. It's not part of the deal. And it's put into the gun, and the other party is this. The gun is fired, and the other party allegedly catches that bullet in his mouth. And then the camera picks up the bullet, and they look, and there's the person's name on the bullet. And I clapped like everybody else. Terrific. And when we drove home, my daughter said to me, "Well, that was magic." And I said, "No, it wasn't magic." She said, "Yeah, it was magic. How could it not be magic?" Well, so what? So it's similar when you come to God, because I can't answer the question of what created all this. It must be magic, and yet there isn't any magic.
I would disagree. Nah, I wouldn't. I'll tell you why. Because there's something called Leibniz, who's a famous philosopher. He coined the phrase, even though it's Aristotelian. It's called the principle of sufficient reason. Yeah? And if we look at the principle of sufficient reason and we look at everything that's around us, everything that has knowledge has a creator. There's not a single thing that we can look in our universe that has knowledge in it that does not have a creator. And you can jump in if you come up with something. And
because you can't, if you take Darwin, for example, and everything that's followed Darwin, and the way man has evolved, and from some kind of creature in the ocean has crawled out of the ocean, we've got that far, and there's no serious dissent to that belief, because there's plenty of scientific evidence about species and how they evolve separately if they're in remote islands, all that kind of thing.
Not necessarily, no.
It's very, very convincing to me. And to half the world, at least half, it's very convincing. So. But
you're
because you can say to me, oh, well, what about this thing? You talked about this something in the sea that crawled up. Oh, who created that? Well, I don't know.
So let's compare let's compare the two things here.
Somebody will know.
So you're saying when you see something, so when you see the stuff around you, what I'm saying is that if you see everything around you has a purpose, according to the principle of sufficient reason, according to the principle of sufficient reason. That's a technical term, but in simple terminology, it means that anything in which there's knowledge comes from a creator. Every cause has an effect.
That's a falsehood. It doesn't come from a
What? Give me an exception.
create that bird up.
I didn't say God. I'm saying every cause has an effect.
Yes, okay, but they're not all known.
So every cause,
are not known.
but every cause has an effect, right?
We'll get back to the gap problem.
So here's the thing.
Origin isn't known. It's a gap in your mind.
Okay, fine.
Therefore, I'll fill that.
Let's stick with this then, yeah? Let's stick with this. And I like this. I want you to do this because it's good practice for me as well. So if everything that we see around us follows the principle of cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, everything has a reason, has a justification or whatnot. Human beings, we don't have a reason, we don't have a justification, we don't know what our cause is. Perfect, brilliant question. Now, if someone thrusts in God with no evidence, yes, God of the gaps, that's not right, that's not good. Let's bring in reasoning. Let's look into either philosophy, let's look into logic, let's look into empirical evidence. Let's find out why God is the inference to the best explanation. That's what science does. Whenever it comes up with a theory, it says, okay, let's see. There are three possible theories. Let's see. We don't know what is fact. Let's come to the inference to the best explanation. It's called abduction, yeah? Let's see. But what I'm saying is, let's do the same over here. Let's analyze the arguments that are here rather than saying, before extrapolating and saying the pie in the sky or this or that, I haven't made the argument. In fact, I don't subscribe to that spirit floating or that grandpa sitting on a chair up there, but we don't believe that. Our definition of God is four-pronged. He is one, independent, does not beget, nor is he begotten, like he doesn't have children, nor was he given birth to, and there's none like him. Not believe he's man. Well, we don't believe he's gender, specific to gender. So with him or with it, we don't believe it to be, a human being who came down to die for people's sins or come down and make mistakes and this and that. We believe that obviously in this world you are subject to time and space. If you come into this world, it's problematic now because you are subject to laws now and you are now dependent on those laws. We believe God to be independent. Yeah, just like Aristotle said, the first cause. That's why I'm saying that. I'll give you one simple argument. You and me, we are dependent. Yeah, we're dependent on water, we're dependent on food, we're dependent on something else. That depends on something else, that depends on something else, that depends on something else. Philosophically and rationally, there's only two options that happens to that chain for you and I to exist. Either there's an infinite regress, which means it goes on forever, which is not proved, there's no evidence for that, it's a paradox in itself, or there is an end to that chain. That's why anyone in philosophy that we've come across, be it Aristotle, be it Plato, Leibniz, even Kant.
There's an end to that chain.
So logically speaking, in dependencies, for you to exist, let me give you an example. If I throw a ball, but before I throw the ball, I have to ask your permission. Then his permission, then his permission, then his permission. If it goes on for infinity, the ball will never be thrown. So for me to throw the ball implies that the chain ended. There was an end to that chain that confirmed it, and I was able to throw it. So the fact that you as a dependent being exist means there has to be an end to that chain, which is considered independent. Otherwise,
By you.
Sorry?
By you.
No, by philosophy and modal logic.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So this is why
You
I'm
don't
saying.
know what it is.
Sorry.
So you don't know what it is.
So this is I'm scaffolding
You
the
may find
argument.
out what it is.
Sorry.
already.
No, I've looked into this, so that's why I'm giving you the
Yeah,
argument.
you've looked into it, but you've come to the wrong conclusion.
No, but I want you to tell me why I'm wrong.
Because it suits your philosophy of life, or your Quran, or your beliefs.
Bear with me. Bear with me.
Nicely.
Bear with
And
me.
the Christians do the same. So I'm not. I'm not getting.
Christians actually don't believe this because they believe Jesus to be God who is actually dependent. So that whole chain, it falls apart. Because Jesus came on this planet, he ate, he drank, he didn't know the hour, he was dependent. But we believe God to be independent.
His dad, that was his dad, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they believe they believe Jesus to be God who died, and God doesn't die. There's a lot. But what I'm saying here
It's
is,
difficult as everybody else's.
no, their thing is one step forward. That's why even the Jews have a problem with it. Yeah.
But, you know, this end game that you ascribe to God, I say that end will move on. In my lifetime, it has moved on, and in my daughter's lifetime, hopefully it'll move on. But there'll always be an unknown end, or there may always be an unknown end.
That's because philosophically and rationally it makes sense.
I don't know how long the world is going to be in existence, our world, but it may be a couple of times where actually that is actually resolved. It may be. I can't see it. There's no evidence that it can be. More likely, it will never be. But you and all the others ascribe it to God, and to me that's ridiculous. Not ridiculous.
Yeah.
A happy coincidence.
No, you can say what you want to me.
Coincidence.
Take me
I
as.
shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
It's a happy
Nice one.
coincidence because it fits in with the book that you subscribe to, and the
No, but it's the other way around for
Christians
us.
do the same.
It's the other way around
The
for
Jews
us.
do the same.
Listen to what I'm saying. It's the other way around for us. It's through the evidence that we subscribe to the book and the religion. The Quran, in fact, tells us and has a falsification test in it. If it was written by somebody else, in it you would find many contradictions. Then there's certain prophecies in it that can be measured, that can be tested. Then there are other things, and that's why in our discussion, whenever we were talking about God, I just gave you two arguments. One based on modal logic.
But you've done that repeatedly, but there's also a third, which is you don't know.
But
You don't know.
not
but
knowing,
you won't accept not knowing.
but not
You say-
knowing,
you can't say you can't say humanity doesn't know. You can't say I don't know because there are two options, and these are my two options. One, there has to be an edge, and what was the other one? I can't remember what the other one was.
But here's the thing. If I go, either this is black, white, let's just say this, yeah? Either it's blue or red, and then you ask me and I go, I don't know. That means I've looked at the blue option and I say it's not blue. And then I look at the red option and I go, it's not red, therefore I don't know. So when you say I don't know, that's a knowledge claim in itself, because I gave you two options and you're saying both of those are not feasible. I'm going to create a third option that is not classical to even people that didn't believe in the traditional God. Like Spinoza didn't believe in our traditional notion of God, but he believed the end to that chain to be a transcendental existence. He didn't accept it to be the Abrahamic God. But what I'm saying to you is that that's fine. If you disagree with what I'm saying, tell me which part you find illogical, inconsistent,
Surely I've told you over and over.
You
and
haven't,
over
not
again.
even once.
You're just not listening to it.
Okay, maybe remind me. Give me one.
But I see there is the unknown, and the unknown moves and has moved through my
How do you
generation.
know?
Well, it has because we see the evidence.
But isn't that a subjective experience of yours? How can you apply that to millions that have come and gone based upon your short time span? I mean, you're young.
Well,
I mean,
I
what is it,
just
30
think-
years, 35 years, 40 years? So in 40 years, you a bit younger, yeah? So in 30 years, how are you going to know all of this? You're not. So that's why, like, agnosticism, that's fair enough. But when something gets bought, I would say, you know what, that's my experience, but I want you to give me something more. Raise the threshold, give me more evidence. So I gave you philosophical evidence. Show me that the Quran, that I can read the Quran and I can determine if it is the same Quran that was sent to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
I don't want to do that. I've already said.
Yeah.
Don't put this to me. Making me nervous. Does it say live?
Yeah, no, this is a microphone.
I know what it is.
Yeah. It looks. Oh, did you say it looks alive?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. This, ironically, is called a dead cat.
How is it?
That's the name of this fluffy thing. Yeah.
I forgot my train of thought now, but I'm happy for you. I'm happy for everybody that has a belief. And sometimes, fleetingly, I think to myself, how nice it would be if I thought the same, but I don't. I just don't.
But here's
I went to a Catholic school. I was brought up as a Catholic. I married a Jewish girl, and I learned the prayers. And
you don't believe in God.
I don't believe in it. I just don't. I just don't believe in it.
So you just did it to secure the bag. That's my guy right there.
Kind of.
I know how men think.
Yeah, kind of.
And
Kind of. She's a beautiful girl, yeah.
it was worth it,
and
huh?
not only that, to please her mum. Cook it for mum
You
and
gotta
side
do
as
what you
well.
gotta do sometimes, you know what I mean? Nah, I get
Exactly.
that.
But my point is
Live and let live, that's your
exactly.
philosophy.
Yes, exactly.
But if you're ever back in the park again, and you want to have a part 2, I do think I've got...
Part two, my God.
There's always, like...
I almost said, my God.
Yeah. Well, that's the innate disposition in you kicking in. But thank you for your time,
Yeah.
and I hope you have a wonderful rest
What
of
are
your
you
day.
going to do with this recording?
Just put the whole thing up as a discussion.
Up where?
YouTube.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know if I look forward to that.
Take care, my friend.